I was carrying a casserole dish when I heard it. The back gate was already open. My son never locked it, said it was too much trouble. And I had come around the side of the house the way I always did, the way I had done for 11 years since he and his wife moved into that neighborhood. I had parked on the street because the driveway was full. That should have told me something. There were cars I didn't recognize. I heard laughter first. Then I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, the way it gets when she thinks she's being clever. High and light, the kind of voice that wants to be overheard. Honestly, how long is she going to keep doing this? Showing up with food like we're a soup kitchen? And then my son who I had driven 40 minutes in August heat to see, said nothing. I heard him laugh. A short laugh, the kind you give when you want someone to keep talking. I stood at the gate. The casserole dish was warm through the towel I had wrapped around it. Chicken and rice. I had made it that morning. I did not leave. I adjusted the towel, I lifted the latch, and I walked into that backyard. My name is Dorothy. I am 73 years old. I was a school librarian for 31 years in the same district, the same building, until I retired. My husband, Gerald, died 6 years ago this past March. Pancreatic cancer. We had 8 months between the diagnosis and the end, which the doctors said was more than most people get. I am not sure more time was a mercy, but I was grateful for it. I held his hand in a room that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and I told him everything I needed to say. He told me too. That part I keep. After Gerald died, my life reorganized itself around smaller things. Morning coffee, the garden he had started that I did not know how to maintain but refused to let go, my book club, which meets on the second Thursday of every month, my neighbor Ruth, who is 81 and still drives herself to the grocery store, and who I check on twice a week because she has no one else nearby, and my son Christopher, who is 44, who works in logistics for a company whose name I always forget, who married a woman named Brenda 12 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than Gerald and I spent on our first house. I am not saying that to be bitter. I am just saying it because it is true and because I think it matters to understand what kind of people we are talking about. For the first few years after the wedding, things were fine. Not warm, but fine. Brenda was polite in the way that people are polite when they are being careful. She called me Mrs. Hale at first and then Dorothy, and the shift was gradual enough that I didn't mark the exact moment. Christopher called on Sundays usually, sometimes Saturdays. We had dinner at each other's homes a few times a year, holidays mostly, and I always brought something because I was raised that way, and because bringing food is one of the few things that still feels like love, in a form I understand how to give. Gerald dying changed things, or maybe it just made visible things that were already there. I noticed it first at Thanksgiving, 2 years after he passed. I had offered to host, the way I always had, but Brenda said they wanted to try hosting at their place, which was fine, reasonable even. People want their own traditions. I brought a sweet potato casserole and a pie. But when I arrived, there were people I didn't know. Brenda's college roommate and her husband, a couple from Christopher's office. I was introduced once, in a vague, sweeping gesture toward me, as Christopher's mom, and then the conversation moved on. I sat in a chair near the window for most of the evening. Nobody came to sit with me. Nobody asked me anything. I told myself I was being sensitive. Gerald had been gone 2 years. I was still learning what rooms felt like without him. That was what I told myself. After that, it became a pattern. Every gathering I attended at their house, I felt less like a guest and more like a piece of furniture that had been moved into the wrong room, present, slightly in the way, not quite right for the space. Christopher would hug me when I arrived, and again when I left, and in between he was always just out of reach, always refreshing someone's drink or checking on the grill or in the middle of a conversation he couldn't step away from. I started timing how long we actually spoke at these visits. One Christmas it was 11 minutes. I counted because I had nothing else to do. Brenda stopped calling me Dorothy. She didn't switch to anything else. She just stopped using my name altogether. If she needed to address me directly, she would clear her throat or start a sentence and let it hang there until I responded. I noticed I kept coming. I have asked myself why since then. I have sat with that question on long evenings when the house is quiet and there is nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. The answer I keep arriving at is this. I kept coming because Christopher was my son. Because when he was 7 years old, he broke his arm falling out of a tree, and I sat with him in the emergency room for 4 hours singing every song I could remember from his childhood, quietly, while he cried. Because when he was 17 and didn't get into the college he wanted, he came into the kitchen at midnight and I made him eggs, and we sat at the table until 2 a.m. without talking very much at all, because I knew him before he knew himself. You don't walk away from that without trying first. I believe that. I needed to know I had tried, so I kept bringing casseroles and pies and sweet potato dishes and zucchini bread, and I kept sitting in chairs near windows, and I kept counting the minutes. That August afternoon, I walked through the gate and I set the casserole dish down on the picnic table without making eye contact with anyone. There were 8 or 9 people in the backyard. Some I recognized, some I didn't. Someone had a speaker going. There was a cooler of beer. Christopher came over. He looked surprised to see me, which meant he had forgotten I was coming, which meant Brenda had not told him or had told him and he hadn't retained it, which meant this was the 3rd time in 2 years that I had driven 40 minutes to a home where my arrival was a surprise. "Mom," he said, "hey, I didn't know you were—" "I told Brenda last week," I said. "Chicken and rice, it's still hot." "Right," he said. "Yeah, thanks." He went back to his friends. I stood at the picnic table. I was wearing a yellow blouse I had bought in June because the color made me feel less tired. I had done my hair. I had made a casserole from scratch. One of the women I didn't recognize asked if I was Christopher's aunt. "His mother," I said. "Oh," she said. And she smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and she turned back to the person she had been talking to. I found a chair on the edge of the patio. I sat in it. I watched my son move through his backyard, laughing and easy, the way he used to be with me once, a long time ago. After about 20 minutes, Brenda came over. She had 2 plates in her hands, and she put one on the small table beside me. Burger and chips. She did not ask what I wanted. She did not sit down. "There you go," she said, and she walked away. There you go, like I was a dog that needed feeding. I sat with that plate on the table beside me, and I did not touch it, and I did not cry, and I did not make a scene. I sat there for another half hour. Then I stood up, I picked up my casserole dish, and I said goodbye to Christopher, who was in the middle of a story about something that had happened at work, and who said, "Love you, Mom, drive safe," without looking at me. And I walked back through the gate into my car. I sat in my car for a while before I started it. I was not crying. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was not grief, exactly. It was something quieter, something that had been building for a long time and had finally, sitting in that backyard chair with an untouched plate of food beside me, become clear. I understood something that afternoon that I had been avoiding understanding for 4 years. I was not a mother to them. I was an obligation. And I had been arriving at their door and handing them more of myself to be obligated by, over and over, and calling it love. I started the car. I drove home. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the bed that Gerald and I had shared for 38 years, and I looked at the ceiling and I let myself feel all of it. The way Christopher had laughed when Brenda said what she said. The 11 minutes at Christmas, the chair by the window, the woman who asked if I was his aunt, the plate of food I hadn't asked for placed beside me without ceremony. I let myself feel it. And then I did something I had never done before. I let myself stop explaining it away. I had spent 4 years building small defenses for them in my own mind. Christopher was busy. Brenda was an introvert. The holidays were stressful for everyone. People are bad at showing love even when they feel it. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was too present. Maybe I reminded them of something uncomfortable, grief or obligation or the weight of a family history they didn't know how to carry. Maybe, Maybe. That night I put all the maybes down. I thought about Gerald. I thought about what he would have said, because Gerald was a man who said the thing clearly and without cruelty. He would have said, "Dorothy, people show you who they are over time. You've had enough time." I thought about my neighbor Ruth, who calls me on Tuesday mornings to say she's going to the store and asks if I need anything, and who does this without being asked, who has done this for 3 years without once making me feel like a burden for accepting. I thought about the women in my book club who sent cards after Gerald died, real cards with handwritten notes, not text messages, and who still check in on hard anniversaries. I thought about my friend Carol, who is 78 and lives in Scottsdale, and who I talk to on the phone every Sunday evening for at least an hour. I thought about all the people in my life who made me feel like a person. And I thought about how much time and energy and chicken and rice I had been carrying 40 minutes down the highway to the one place where I did not. I called my friend Carol the next morning. I told her what had happened, not the parts I usually soften, but all of it. The gate, the laugh, the plate. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Carol is not a woman who fills silences just to fill them. "What do you want to do?" she said. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I think I'm done." "Done with what?" "All of it," I said. "The casseroles, the chairs by the window, the driving, all of it." Another silence. "Good," she said. That was all. Good. And somehow that one word from Carol was the first thing in a very long time that made me feel completely seen. I did not call Christopher that week. I usually called on Sundays and sometimes Wednesdays, and I let both of those days pass without calling. I did not expect him to notice immediately. He didn't. I used the time differently. I called the county library district and asked about their volunteer reading program, adults who read to children in the public libraries on Saturday mornings. I had been thinking about it for years and had kept putting it off. I signed up. I also looked into a senior travel group that Carol had mentioned, something through the community center in her town. They had a trip to New England in October, the fall foliage, the coast of Maine. I had never been to Maine. I signed up for that, too. I rearranged Gerald's study, not to erase him. I would never want to erase him, but to make it mine. I moved his armchair so that it faced the window instead of the desk. I put a small table beside it for my tea. I brought in the reading lamp from the bedroom, the good one. I sat in that chair on a Thursday afternoon in August with a book and a cup of chamomile, and I looked out the window at the garden, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I wanted to be. Christopher called on a Sunday 3 weeks after the backyard. I let it ring twice before I answered. Old habit. "Hey, Mom, haven't heard from you." "No," I said. A pause. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Busy." Another pause. I could hear him recalibrating. Christopher is a man who functions well when things are predictable, and I had been very predictable for a very long time. "We were thinking we might come by next weekend," he said. "Brenda wants to—" "I have plans next weekend," I said. "Oh." A longer pause. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to Maine," I said. I had not yet confirmed my deposit on the trip, but I did it that evening. Christopher said something about how that sounded nice. He said we would figure out another time. He said he'd tell Brenda. The call lasted maybe 7 minutes, and when it was over, I sat in Gerald's armchair, and I breathed slowly, and I noticed that I felt something I had not expected to feel. I felt fine, not relieved, not triumphant, not sad, just fine. Like a knot that had been sitting in my chest for years had quietly and without ceremony come undone. The main trip was in October. 7 days, 12 people, 2 of whom became people I still talk to regularly. One was a woman named Frances, 68, recently divorced, a retired occupational therapist from Ohio. The other was a man named Howard, 71, a widower from Pennsylvania who had been on 3 of these trips and who knew which restaurants to go to and which scenic overlooks were worth the drive. Howard made me laugh on the second day in a way I had not laughed in longer than I could measure, not because he was trying to be funny, just because he was honest and a little dry, and he said true things simply. We ate lobster in a place that had plastic chairs and paper napkins and was so good, I thought about it for weeks afterward. We walked on a beach in the wind with our coats zipped all the way up, and Frances took a photo of me standing at the water's edge, and when I saw it later, I was surprised. I looked like someone who was living her life. Christopher called twice while I was in Maine. I called back when I returned. He asked how it was. I told him it was wonderful. He said that was good. He said Brenda had been asking about Thanksgiving. I felt the old pull. The familiar lean toward yes. The instinct to say, of course, what should I bring? What time should I arrive? I did not follow the instinct. I'm spending Thanksgiving with Carol this year, I said. She's flying me out to Scottsdale. Oh, Christopher said. Mom, we were hoping. I know, I said. Next year, maybe. We'll talk. I was not cold when I said it. I was not unkind. But I was clear, and I could hear, in the pause that followed, that Christopher understood something had shifted, even if he didn't know what or why or when. He didn't ask. I noticed that he didn't ask. I spent Thanksgiving in Scottsdale with Carol. We ate at a restaurant because neither of us wanted to cook, and it was warm enough to sit outside, and there were little white lights strung along the patio, and a musician playing something quiet in the corner, and we drank good wine and talked for 4 hours. Carol said, "You seem different." "Different how?" "Lighter," she said, "like something stopped pulling at you." I thought about that, about the casseroles and the chairs by windows and the 40-minute drives and the 11 minutes at Christmas. "Something did," I said. "I need to tell you about my granddaughter. Christopher and Brenda have a daughter, Lily. She is 14. For most of her life, she was attached to her parents' orbit the way children are. And I saw her at holidays and a few summer visits, and she was pleasant and distracted in the way teenagers are. I had never felt particularly close to her, not the way I imagined grandmothers and granddaughters were supposed to be close. In February, about 6 months after the backyard, she texted me. She had gotten my number from somewhere, Christopher's phone probably. And the message said, "Hi, Grandma Dorothy. I heard you went to Maine. I've always wanted to go there. Did you see a lighthouse?" I stared at the message for a long time. I wrote back, "I saw 4 lighthouses. I'll send you the photos if you want." She said she wanted. I sent the photos. She responded to each one. She told me she was taking a photography class at school and asked which camera I used. And when I told her just my phone, she said, that was actually the best way to learn composition. She was 14 and she spoke about composition. I was charmed. We texted every week or two after that. Nothing long, nothing heavy. She asked about my book club. She told me about a project she was doing on local history. She sent me a photo of a red-tailed hawk she had spotted from her bedroom window. I sent her back a photo of the cardinal that comes to Gerald's feeder every morning. In April, she asked if she could come visit me on her own, not with her parents, on her own. She would take the bus. I said yes. She came on a Saturday morning in May. She was taller than I expected. She had her father's eyes and something else in her face that I recognized slowly after she had been sitting at my kitchen table for an hour as something familiar, a kind of attentiveness, a way of listening that was not waiting for her turn to speak. She was attentive the way Gerald had been attentive. I do not know how that happens across generations. I only know that I recognized it. We spent the whole day together. I showed her the garden. She helped me figure out why the roses weren't blooming, something about drainage that she'd read about online, and she was right. We made lunch together. She looked through the photo albums I had not opened since Gerald died, and she asked questions about each picture, real questions, not polite questions. At one point, she picked up a photo of Gerald and me from what must have been 1987, and she said, "You look so happy here, both of you." "We were," I said. "I'm sorry you lost him," she said. Just that, clean and simple and true. I had to take a moment. Before she left, she hugged me and she said, "Can I come back this summer?" "Every weekend if you want," I said. She has come 6 times since then. I did not cut Christopher out of my life. I want to be honest about that. I am not a woman who cuts. But I stopped organizing my life around his. I stopped driving 40 minutes to sit in chairs by windows. I stopped bringing casseroles to people who set them on a table and walked away. I stopped making myself small enough to fit into the space they were willing to give me. I started taking up the space I actually needed. There is a difference between those two things that I did not fully understand until I was 73 years old. I wish I had understood it sooner. I also understand why I didn't. When you love someone, when you made them from nothing and raise them and watch them become themselves, you will shrink yourself an extraordinary number of times before you finally stop. Because stopping feels like giving up. It feels like a kind of failure. I know now that it is not. Christopher and I talk on the phone occasionally. He asks how I am. I tell him. We do not talk about the backyard. I do not know if he thinks about it. I think about it less than I expected to. What I think about more is the October beach in Maine. Francis standing next to me laughing at something. Howard pointing out a lighthouse in the distance. The way the wind came off the Atlantic and the sky was so clear it looked like something Gerald would have tried to photograph with his old film camera. I think about Lily on my front porch in May, holding a photo of her grandparents from 1987. I think about Carol on a warm Thanksgiving patio in Scottsdale saying lighter, like something stopped pulling at you. I think about Gerald and what he would have said and how he would have been right. I think about the chair in his study facing the window. My good reading lamp, my tea, the cardinal on the feeder outside. I am 73 years old. I am not invisible. I am not a burden. I am not an obligation to be managed or a guest who arrived without being properly remembered. I am a woman with a good life, and I am the one who made it good. And I am not done yet, not even close. If you are sitting somewhere right now recognizing any part of this, if you know what it is to bring something made with your own hands to a door where you are not quite expected to sit in a chair at the edge of things and count the minutes, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stop driving the 40 minutes. You are allowed to say you have plans this weekend and mean it, and feel fine when you hang up the phone. You are allowed to sign up for the trip to Maine, to rearrange the study, to text the granddaughter back. You are not giving up. You are finally, after a very long time, giving yourself what you deserved all along. I know this because I am Dorothy Hale, 73 years old, retired school librarian, widow, grandmother, and reader of books in a comfortable chair facing a garden window. And I am doing just fine.